Hey, good evening. Good to see everybody again. Want to be able to give you a quick update on what's happened in day 4 of impeachment trial, but it's the third day of the actual testimony from the House managers. They had 3 full days, 24 hours. They actually used 23, I think, 23 and some change of the 24 hours total of their time to be able to make their case. And then tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m., the White House will get the first opportunity to be able to actually give their side of the story, and that'll kick in because they obviously didn't get a chance to be able to do that on the House side. And then it's been 3 days now for the House managers to be able to make their case. White House starts tomorrow at 10 o'clock and will start making their case. They have the same amount of time, have 24 hours over 3 days if they choose to be able to use that. I don't know how they're going to choose to do it. We're all just taking notes and being able to track it as we go through. Busy mornings, there's a lot we try to get knocked out because we start here at 1 o'clock, which is noon Central Time, but we start at 1 o'clock here. So we try to crank through as many things as I can in the morning. Today, I did get the chance to be able to sneak away. I skipped lunch, actually, went down the mall because today is the March for Life Day here in Washington, D.C., and there are tens of thousands of students, as well as a lot of students from Oklahoma that are here for the March for Life. They gather once a year. This is the anniversary of the Supreme Court case in 1973 on Roe v. Wade. And so every year, tens of thousands of people come and to be able to just march for life. And it's a time of a rally, time to be able to just hear from speakers. And they literally leave out from an area pretty close to the White House on the mall near the Washington Monument, that area. And then they will then walk down to the Supreme Court with just signs and just to be able to say, hey, I'm pro-life, and be able to make that. So that happened today. So it's kind of fun to be able to watch. But I snuck away at lunchtime, was able to make it back before the actual trial actually began to be able to be back in my seat. The House managers today, let me give you the quick recap, I guess. The House managers today had several things that they were trying to be able to knock through. They were ending what they call Article 1. That is the abuse of power allegation, where they were walking through all the different issues for the president. They've done that for the previous 2 days. As I've mentioned before, it's been very repetitious to walk through different videos, and we hear a lot of testimony that they've done by video. And so we're taking in a lot of these different pieces of testimony. They ended that fairly early today with a little bit of speculation, actually. They tried to be able to walk through some things that they were trying to be more fact-based in the first 2 days. Today was a lot of speculation that we believe the president, there's no good explanation why this is not what he meant. We believe this is what he meant to do. So there was a lot of that. They started a whole section, for instance, on that the damage was done based on the president's actions, but they really weren't able to back that up. But they made a lot of accusations. Russia is stronger because of this. We believe people died on the front line fighting in Ukraine because of this hot war with Russia, that because funding was delayed, that maybe people died there, maybe there was some insecurity, maybe Russia got a foothold, but it was a lot of speculation as we walked through it. Weren't able to really be able to back that up one way or the other. It is an interesting thing that hasn't really come out, but I know just because I track some of these things as well. The funding actually that was delayed that did happen, in that delay in the 2019 funding that went to Ukraine, it actually was sent to Ukraine on the 30th of September, which is the deadline for all the funding to get in. So it went on the 30th of September. But if you go back to 2018, the year before, the funding got to Ukraine the 28th of September. So when they talk a lot about the delay in the funding, it's really only 2 days different than 2018 to 2019. And there is no accusation that there was a problem at all in the 2018 funds. And it was actually very similar to the 2017. There's also a lot of conversation about not all the money was spent because it was so close to the end. That's actually been true for 4 or 5 years now, that the money gets close to the end. DOD is not able to get it all done, and so it carries over into the next year. So it's been about the same amount, somewhere from $20 to $30 million each year that has to get carried over into the next year. That's happened every year since 2015, actually. And so it'll be interesting just to be able to track some of that. So that was a part of that abuse of power in that section of it. Then they shifted and spent the last 2/3 of the day on the second article. That was the Article 2 on obstruction of Congress. That is, the president didn't turn over all the documents immediately to the House. He blocked witnesses. There were 71 different sets of documents and that the House managers wanted to be able to get that the White House did not turn over. There were quite a few different witnesses that they wanted to be able to get that the White House blocked. Now, the White House has already made their position clear from the very first day in the arguments about how we're going to argue that whole day. The White House made their position very clear at that point that they believed that constitutionally, the House had not actually declared an impeachment at that time. And so once the House declares impeachment, then they can do the subpoenas for all the impeachment, and that kicks in. But remember that the House delayed for a long time actually doing an impeachment vote, and then they took it at the very end. And that White House's position has been, and there's a long document on that, the White House position has been, hey, they've got to do that first or else the subpoenas aren't valid to be able to honor that. Now, the House managers today vehemently argued against that and said, no, that shouldn't matter. We should be able to get whatever documents we want from the White House. We should be able to get whatever witnesses we want from the White House. But then the House managers talked about, how fast they have to be able to get through this process. And then they're sending it over to the Senate. And now the request of the Senate is, we didn't get these things from the White House, so we think you should get these things from the White House and to be able to go through this legal process. And there's really two arguments the House was making today. They were saying that, yes, if it goes through the House of Representatives, then it goes to court. That's the typical model, is that if the Article 1, that's the Congress, disagrees with Article 2, that's the executive branch constitutionally. So if the executive branch and the Congress can't agree on something, then they go to the courts. It's Article 3 of our Constitution. So that's the typical route that it happens. What the House was saying today is, we wanted to go fast with this process and send it to the Senate, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is sitting in the Senate trial. He can just make this decision on his own and everything will be expedited. And it was interesting, Adam Schiff, at the end of the day, he spent a lot of time saying that the courts just slow us down, that when we're doing something as important as impeachment, we shouldn't have to go through the courts. We should just be able to decide it as Congress and not use the courts at all. In fact, he spent a lot of time talking about how slow it is to go through the appeals and everything else. So we should just skip the courts entirely and not use the courts because they're too slow. Now, I was a little surprised by that because I'd not heard anyone make the argument before of, hey, we just should skip courts and to not allow the president to be able to have his day in court. It's interesting that Adam Schiff spent a lot of time at the end saying that there's no time that's too long to have a fair trial. But then he started by saying, but you should go really fast and not let it go to the courts because that'll just slow it down. So if you go back to the Clinton trial, if you go to the Nixon trial, the courts were involved in each of those. The President Clinton argued on certain privileges that went to court. It took a couple of months to be able to get a decision from court, but it was expedited and it came out and you got a decision on that. In the Nixon trial as well, President Nixon argued some things on executive privilege, lost that, went all the way to the Supreme Court. He lost that. And so he had to face that, but they were allowed to be able to go to court. The courts can move fast on things like impeachment. Some people may remember in 2000 when there was an argument about the election, when it was President Bush running against candidate Gore at that time, and there was a lockup in Florida, and they had to get a decision and had about 2 months before we had the new president coming in. The courts knew that, and they did an expedited process through it, and they got a rapid decision. There were several things in the impeachment trial with Bill Clinton that also took about 2 months to be able to get that. So the court can move quickly through all the appeals to be able to get that resolved. But the House manager's argument today was, we don't need to use the courts. We shouldn't allow the president to use the courts. The Senate should block them from using the courts, make the decision on your own, and just keep moving on it from there. So that was a new argument that they hadn't made during some of the earlier times. Trying to look through some of my notes and see some of the other things there. They talked, Nadler came, Manager Nadler, he came and spoke a lot about the history of impeachment and about obstruction of Congress and how important this is to be able to set a precedent for the future about, can a president just not send documents over? It's interesting because there's really two precedents there. They're arguing the precedent is, if we don't impeach the president now, every future president will just not turn documents over to Congress. I would assume tomorrow the White House is going to make the argument, if you do an impeachment now, you're setting a precedent that the president doesn't have access to the courts, that you can just skip that through the courts. So there really are two precedents that are in conversation at this point. And Representative Nadler was really kind of going through some history over the past 2 centuries of the court, how this works and how you deal with trying to turn documents over. Adam Schiff did the ending time. He spoke for about a little over an hour and 15 minutes or so towards the very end to kind of wrap up. He talked through, here's what the 2 articles are. He reread the articles. He talked about what he feels like they approved at this point and spent a lot of time on that. He had a whole section on Robert Kennedy talking about moral courage and what it takes to have moral courage to make difficult decisions. But then it was really odd. At the very end, he said, I read in the news this morning that the president has said and has sent a message to the Republicans in the Senate that their head will be on a pike if they don't support me. And the Republicans in the room were visibly shaken by that because none of us have heard that. We have no idea what he's talking about. but it kept going on and on about the president's threatening Republicans in this room to put their head on the pike. It's because he believes he's a king. And it was interesting. The room's been really quiet for 4 days. But when Adam Schiff said the president is telling Republicans he's going to put their head on a pike if they don't support him, literally there was this spontaneous from the whole room on my side of the room saying, that's not true. You're lying. That's not true. You're saying something that's not factually correct. And Adam Schiff actually turned his head and said, well, I hope it's not true. And people were out loud saying back to him, that's not true. But he just kept on saying it over and over again. It was such a shock in the room, not only because it's been so quiet, but it was so offensive to so many people that he would say to everyone in the room, I know you're all going to support the president, because if not, the president's going to put your head on a pike, and he's threatened everybody. Nothing of the sort has been even close to that. In fact, we were all talking as it finished, like, where did that even come from? Where did that story even come from? So I don't know if you were watching, if you could kind of feel that in the room or not, but that was his closing at the very end. And so it made for this really odd, toxic closing at the very end that I don't know what his legal strategy was, but I'm sure he has a legal strategy. He's a very smart guy, and people have all their opinions on Adam Schiff one way or the other on it, but he's a very smart guy and is a well-studied attorney. But that was just an interesting way for him to be able to wrap up the trial from there. So tomorrow, we finish up everything tonight. As I mentioned before, the House managers have had 3 full days to be able to make their case. The White House will start tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., 9 a.m. Central Time in the center of the University of Oklahoma. So if you want to be able to track it, you can track it just the same way tomorrow. That'll be the first day. We don't believe the White House is going to go as long tomorrow. I don't know how many hours they're going to go, but it doesn't look like they're going to go very many. I think they're being conscious that it's a Saturday and that more people won't be tracking it, but they'll start at 9 a.m. My guess is Central Time. My guess is they'll probably finish somewhere around noon Central Time. Now, I'm just guessing, but that's kind of my feel for what I think is going to happen tomorrow. And then they'll pick up again Monday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, again, noon Central Time, and to be able to go through the time Monday. And if they choose to keep going on Tuesday, they can keep going from there. After that time period, if they go, let's say they go Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, then on Wednesday, we would start 16 hours of questions where senators can write in any question, and then we can submit that to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He'll read those questions to both sides, and both sides will have an opportunity to be able to answer. So it's kind of a rebuttal period back and forth where they get the opportunity to be able to talk about each other's arguments. We also get the chance to be able to say, hey, you never answered this part of the issue. Can you answer this? Can you quote back to previous witnesses you've already had, or whatever it may be? So we'll have that. That'll probably start either Tuesday or Wednesday. And like I said, it's 16 hours. We don't know if we'll use all 16 hours of that. It just depends on how many questions there and how long everybody's answers are. After that, then there'll be more decision times to be able to see what happens next in the trial. So if you've got questions on it, feel free to be able to contact our office. We had just under 200 people that called our office yesterday total. People are emailing us or contacting us or posting things on this Facebook Live. If you've got thoughts and questions as we go through the process and you think I've got a good question I'd like to be able to submit, feel free to be able to contact us by email or to be able to just call us and be able to leave a message for the questions that you would have for either side as well. Now, I know everybody's got opinions on that. It's great. Feel free to be able to share those. But as we walk through the trial the next several days, I encourage you just to be able to stay engaged. I think I mentioned to everybody last night that Proverbs 18:17 is a proverb that I've mentioned to a couple of folks, and that is, in a lawsuit, the first to make their case always seems right until they're cross-examined. So it's important for everybody. You hear both sides of the story. We're trying to be able to do the same thing as well, get both sides of the story, because always the first person that steps up is going to make a very common sense argument. These are a lot of really smart people that are making the arguments here as House managers. The other side's going to be able to step up. There's a lot of smart attorneys on their side as well. They'll make their case. Both the American people and members of the Senate will then make their decision from there. So let us know if there's any way that we can help or stay engaged in the days ahead. You can do that by going to @Senator Lankford on any of the social media platforms, to our website, which we continue to be able to load up with more information on impeachment and the different documents. That's at lankford.senate.gov. That's also got the phone numbers for all of our offices, where you can leave a message over the weekend or to be able to just touch base with us, or you can just get a chance to be able to call us on Monday if we miss each other over the weekend as well. So God bless you. We'll see where things continue to be able to go in the days ahead. And hopefully we can get a chance to be able to continue to get input and as many folks as possible to be able to hear the things out.